Level 1, the no-show. You're 26 years old. You got a DUI 8 months ago, your first offense. A stupid mistake after your cousin's wedding that you've been paying a lawyer $300 a month to make disappear ever since. You had a court date. You forgot it. Not on purpose. You were switching jobs that week. Your phone died and you didn't back up your calendar, and the court's reminder text went to a number you haven't used since college. By the time you remember, the date has already passed by 11 days. The judge issues a bench warrant without a second thought. It's routine. It sits in a county database alongside 4,000 others just like it. Unglamorous, unremarkable. The digital equivalent of a parking ticket nobody paid. You don't even know it exists yet. You go back to your life, work, gym, dinner, with your girlfriend on Fridays, completely unaware that somewhere in a system you've never seen, your name just got flagged. 6 weeks later, a deputy U.S. Marshal gets your warrant routed through a routine local task force sweep, one of 40 names on a list he'll work through that month. He doesn't kick your door down. He doesn't need to. He runs your name through motor vehicle records, cross-references it against a change of address filing you didn't think anyone would ever actually check, and by 6:45 the next morning, he's parked outside your building, with a coffee going cold in the cup holder, waiting for the lights in your apartment to turn on. He knocks at 7 a.m. sharp. You open the door in socks, a mug of coffee still in your hand, and for one full second you think it's a delivery. Then you see the badge. You feel more embarrassed than scared, the way you'd feel getting caught in a lie by someone you respect. He asks your name, confirms it against the warrant on his phone, and says the same line he says to nearly everyone at this level, flat and without malice. You had a chance to fix this quietly, and you didn't take it. You ask if you can put on shoes. He says yes. That's the whole interaction. No raised voices, no drama. Just a quiet, procedural end to something you'd already convinced yourself had gone away. You spend one night in county sharing a cell with a 19-year-old kid who won't stop talking and a man who won't say a word. Your public defender gets the warrant recalled by noon the next day. It costs you a missed shift, a towed car you have to pay $310 to get back, and a permanent flag on your record that will show up on every background check you run for the next 7 years, quietly disqualifying you from jobs you'll never know you almost had. You learn the first rule of this whole system, standing in the impound lot afterward, staring at a receipt. The system doesn't forget, it just waits. Level 2, the runner. You're 31. You manage a restaurant on the east side. You've got 2 kids, a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old, and a shoplifting charge from a target 11 months ago spirals into something worse because you panicked in the moment and gave a fake name to the responding officer. That single decision, made in about 4 seconds of pure fear, turns a $60 misdemeanor into something with actual teeth, obstruction, plus the original charge, plus a warrant when you miss the arraignment because you convince yourself, against every piece of logic you actually possess, that if you just don't show up, it'll eventually go away on its own. It doesn't. A warrant for failure to appear gets issued, and this is where it stops being simple. You move apartments twice in 4 months, telling yourself you're just getting a fresh start. Always one step ahead of a knock that never quite comes, never realizing that every lease application, every utility hookup under your real name, every Amazon delivery with a signature confirmation is a breadcrumb leading straight back to you. You've seen enough true crime shows to think you'd know if someone was watching you. You wouldn't. Nobody does. A deputy works your case for 3 weeks in between 4 other open files. He talks to your old landlord, who mentions offhand that you left owing a month's rent. He talks to your sister, who doesn't rat you out, she'd never, but flinches at the mention of your name in a way that tells him everything he needs to know. He finds your current address through a package delivery confirmation, your own name auto-populated on a signature pad at a doorstep 3 miles from your last one. He knocks at 6:15 in the morning, the hour deputies favor specifically because people are groggiest and least likely to run. You answer in a bathrobe, hair still messy, and behind you in the hallway your 9-year-old is sitting cross-legged in front of the TV watching cartoons, a bowl of cereal balanced on her knees. You start crying before the deputy even finishes his sentence, not because you're scared of him, because your daughter has just looked up from the television and is now watching, with wide, confused eyes, as her mother gets handcuffed in their own kitchen doorway. "Mommy, why?" she starts to ask, and you don't have an answer that a 5-year-old could understand, so you just tell her you love her, twice, as the deputy walks you to the car. That image doesn't leave you. It doesn't leave the deputy either. Not really. He's seen it 100 times, and it still sits wrong in his chest every single time. Do 11 days in county before a judge, visibly sympathetic once he hears about your kids, releases you on time served plus probation. You pick your daughter up from your sister's that afternoon, and she hugs you so hard it knocks the air out of you, and neither of you says anything about it. Not that day. Not ever. You learn the second rule the hardest way there is. Running doesn't buy you freedom. It just rents you a countdown, and somebody else always ends up paying the interest. Level 3, the bail jumper. You're 34, out on a $15,000 bond for a felony drug distribution charge. A bond your mother co-signed by putting her house up as collateral without a second thought, because that's the kind of mother she's always been. You skip your next court date entirely. Not late. Gone. You tell yourself you just need time to think, to figure out a plan, and somewhere underneath that lie is the truth you won't say out loud, even to yourself. You're terrified of the number the prosecutor mentioned in the hallway outside the courtroom, and terror doesn't make good decisions. The bail bondsman sends a recovery agent first, standard practice before it ever becomes a federal matter. But you're smarter than the average skip, or at least you think you are. You ditch your phone, pay cash for everything, cut your hair different, and crash with a rotating cast of old friends who know better than to ask questions. The recovery agent loses your trail after 5 days of dead ends. That's exactly when it stops being a bondsman's problem and becomes a Marshals case, a felony bail jumping warrant, and once you cross state lines, which you do, driving 11 straight hours to Ohio to crash with a cousin you haven't spoken to in 6 years, it becomes unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. A federal charge, stacked on top of everything else, the moment your tires cross the state line. A deputy pulls your cousin's name from an old county jail visitation log, a single line item from 3 years back. You visited him twice while he did a short stretch for a DUI, and nobody erases that kind of record, ever. He coordinates with a regional task force out of Ohio. They sit on the house for 2 days, running plates, watching the porch light, waiting for a pattern to confirm what the paperwork already suggests. They take you off the front porch at 9 p.m. on a Thursday. No weapon, no struggle. Just a man who looks exhausted in a way that has nothing to do with sleep, the specific exhaustion of someone who's been running on adrenaline and fast food for 3 weeks straight and finally has nowhere left to run to. In the back of the unmarked car, staring out the window at streetlights blurring past, you say one thing out loud, to nobody in particular. My mom's gonna lose the house now, isn't she? Nobody in the front seat answers you, because you already know the answer, and saying it out loud wouldn't change it. You ride the rest of the way in, silence, watching your own reflection in the window. You learn the third rule of this whole system in that silence, and it's the one that stays with you longest. Every warrant has a second victim who never committed a crime at all, and in your case, she's 61 years old and about to lose the only house she's ever owned. Level 4, the domestic violence evader. You're 39. A protective order violation escalates into a full assault charge after you show up at your ex-wife's house twice in 1 month. The first time just to talk. The second time after she wouldn't answer the door, ending with you putting your fist through a window well enough that she calls 911, with her hands shaking so badly she can barely hold the phone. You don't wait around for the warrant to catch up with you. You already know, somehow, that domestic violence fugitives get prioritized differently than almost anyone else on this list, moved faster through the system because the danger is specific and immediate. So you run the same night the incident report gets filed, throwing a duffel bag in your truck before the ink is even dry on the paperwork. This is where the Marshal Service treats things very differently than the movies suggest. You're not a kingpin. You've never hurt a stranger in your life, but you're exactly the profile that gets escalated fast, because your ex-wife is genuinely, visibly terrified. A responding officer notes in his report that her hands wouldn't stop shaking for 20 minutes, and that fear is treated as real, urgent data, not just an emotional response to be smoothed over. Your case gets folded into a regional fugitive task force operation built specifically around domestic violence and protective order warrants. They move on you in 9 days, not 9 weeks, because everyone involved understands that delay in a case like yours has a body count nobody wants to explain to a grieving family later. They find you at a Motel 40, miles outside the city, paying cash under a name that isn't quite an alias, just your middle name used as a first name. The kind of half-effort disguise that convinces exactly nobody and never actually works. When they knock, you don't run. You don't reach for anything either. You just sit on the edge of the motel bed with your head in your hands, staring at the ugly carpet, and you let them cuff you without a word of protest. A deputy asks you, off the record, in the quiet minute before backup arrives to process you, why you went back that second time, after everything, after the restraining order, after she told you clearly it was over. You say you don't know. You say it like it's the truest thing you've ever said. That's usually the answer at this level. Not a plan, not a plot. Just a compulsion nobody, including the man feeling it, can fully explain. You learn the fourth rule the way every man at this level eventually does. Sitting in the back of a car with a busted window's worth of consequences finally catching up to you. The crime that gets you caught fastest isn't always the most violent one on paper. It's the one that scares the most people the deepest. Level 5, the gang enforcement target. You're 22, a mid-level member of a Brooklyn crew that's been under quiet investigation for 8 months under something called Operation Triple Beam, a real program the Marshals run specifically to pull violent gang members and illegal firearms off the street in coordinated multi-agency sweeps. You're not the boss. You're not even close to the boss. But you've got 2 open warrants sitting on you. One for a firearms charge from a traffic stop that went sideways, one for aggravated assault from a fight outside a club. And you've been ghosting both for months, sleeping on your girlfriend's couch some nights, your grandmother's spare room on others, never in the same bed 2 nights running, because somewhere in the back of your mind, you know they're looking. This is a different animal entirely from everything above it on this list. They don't come alone, and they don't come quiet. It's a 6-person task force operation, vests on under jackets, a battering ram sitting in the trunk of the lead vehicle, just in case, because your file flags you as known to carry and known to run. They get their opening through a confidential informant embedded inside your own crew, someone who flipped after catching a federal charge of his own, the oldest and most reliable trade in this entire business, older than any of the technology involved. They hit your grandmother's apartment at 5 a.m., the door coming open fast and loud, and you're asleep on the pull-out couch in the front room, so disoriented by the noise and the flashlight beams that you don't even get your hand within a foot of the gun sitting on the coffee table before 3 grown men in vests have you pinned face down on the carpet. Your grandmother is awake, instantly, up out of bed and into the front room in her nightgown before anyone can stop her, screaming, not at you, at them. The exact way grandmothers scream when the boy they raised from a baby is suddenly a stranger face down on her living room floor with a knee in his back. He's a good boy, she keeps shouting, over and over, and none of the deputies answer her, because there's nothing to say that would help. You don't say a word the whole ride to the district office. You just stare, straight ahead out the window, jaw tight, the exact expression a deputy on that task force has watched on 200 kids just like you, across a 15-year career. A look that stopped surprising him, but never quite stopped bothering him. You learn the 5th rule the moment the cuffs click shut, though you'll never actually say it out loud to anyone, not even yourself. By the time the door comes off its hinges, the story already ended somewhere else entirely, years earlier, probably in a house that looked a lot like your grandmother's. Level 6, the sex offender non-compliant. You're 51. A registered offender who stopped checking in with your state registry 18 months ago and quietly relocated across 3 state lines without notifying anyone, a direct and deliberate violation of the Adam Walsh Act. Your case doesn't land on a task force's desk through a routine sweep. It comes through the National Sex Offender Targeting Center, a specialized unit that exists for exactly one reason, because men like you are counting, correctly in most cases, on different state systems not talking to each other fast enough to catch the gap. The search takes 11 weeks, longer than almost anything else on this entire list, because you're careful in a way most fugitives simply aren't. No credit cards in your name, no car registered to you. You work construction jobs, cash only, no paper trail, and you move to a new site every few months before any coworker gets curious enough to ask real questions. What finally breaks it open is almost embarrassingly small. A coworker, making conversation on a lunch break, mentions you by an old nickname in a public comment on a job site's social media post, geotagged, 3 states away from where your registry says you're supposed to be living. A targeting center analyst finds it in a routine keyword sweep 2 days later. They take you at the job site trailer on a Tuesday afternoon. No incident, no struggle at all. Men in your position rarely fight, because fighting draws exactly the kind of attention your entire strategy has depended on avoiding for 18 straight months. What follows isn't really about the arrest itself. It's what comes after, back at the district office, when the case file gets pulled up in full, everything that put you on that registry in the first place, sitting there in black and white on a screen for anyone processing you to read. Nobody in the room says much. There's nothing to say. You learn the 6th rule sitting in a holding cell that night, and it isn't really phrased like a rule so much as a fact you spent 18 months actively refusing to think about. Every single day you stayed uncaught, was a day you were invisible to the one system specifically built to keep an eye on you. And invisibility was never actually the same thing as freedom. Level 7. The financial fraud fugitive. You're 48, a former financial advisor who ran a Ponzi scheme for 6 years, quietly taking $11 million from around 60 investors. Most of them retirees, most of them people who trusted you specifically because you sat 2 pews behind them at church every Sunday for 15 years, because you coached their grandkids' little league team, because you were, to them, one of the good ones. When the SEC investigation finally closes in, you don't panic the way anyone would expect. You've had 6 years to think about this moment. You liquidate what you can quietly, wire money through 3 shell accounts spread across 2 continents, and board a flight to Lisbon 4 days before your indictment becomes public record. Your case pulls in the Marshals Office of International Affairs, coordination with Interpol, and 9 months of painstaking financial forensics before investigators even confirm which country you're actually in. Extradition isn't like the movies make it look. It's paperwork, bilateral treaties, diplomatic, patience measured in months instead of days, sometimes years of legal maneuvering before anyone gets near enough to make an arrest. What finally locates you is almost accidentally small. A property purchase. A villa outside Lisbon bought under your sister's maiden name. A detail so minor, it takes a forensic accountant 3 full weeks of cross-referencing to even notice the pattern, connecting it back to you. Portuguese authorities take you into custody first, at your own front gate. On a quiet Tuesday morning, a deputy flies out for the formal handoff at Lisbon's airport 11 months after you first vanished. You're walked onto the plane in handcuffs, composed, expensive sunglasses still on, looking for all the world like a man boarding a routine business trip instead of a man returning to face the 60 families whose futures he emptied out. In the departure terminal, before the flight, one of your victims is there, an 81-year-old man named Harold who lost his late wife's entire retirement savings, who paid his own money to fly out just to be in the room when the cuffs finally went on you. You don't look at him. He doesn't stop looking at you, not for 1 second, the whole time you're walked past. You learn the 7th rule somewhere in that specific, unbearable silence, though you'll spend the entire flight home refusing to admit it even to yourself. Stealing money instead of using violence never actually buys you less guilt. It only ever buys you more, time before you're finally forced to feel it. Level 8. The Escaped Inmate. You're 29, serving an 18-year sentence for armed robbery, and you walk off a work release crew doing highway cleanup in broad daylight. You simply step behind a tree line, while the one guard on duty is distracted by a radio call, and you don't stop walking for 6 straight hours, deep into farmland you don't recognize. An escape charge changes absolutely everything about how the marshals treat your case afterward, because an escaped inmate has by definition already proven he won't stay caught through any of the normal channels. This becomes a full task force manhunt within hours of the head count coming up short. State police, K-9 units, a helicopter running grid patterns overhead, and half a dozen deputies pulled off other cases to focus entirely on you. You don't have a Ponzi schemer's resources or a bail jumper's ordinary, garden variety desperation. You have 18 years hanging over your head and, as far as you're concerned, nothing left to lose, which makes you the single most dangerous profile on this entire list. Not necessarily because of what you've already done, but specifically because of what a man with nothing left to lose might do next. They track you through your mother's landline, a number she thinks nobody's watching, after you call her twice in 4 days, from payphones scattered across a 30-mile radius, each call 3 minutes or less, each one just enough to hear her voice and tell her you're okay. They corner you on the 6th day in an abandoned barn on the edge of that same 30-mile radius, and for the only time across this entire list, it goes fully physical. You come at the first deputy through the barn door swinging a length of rusted pipe you found leaning against a stall, and it takes 3 grown men to finally get you flat on the ground, one knee driving into your shoulder blade, another pinning your legs. Nobody gets seriously hurt, though it's close, closer than anyone involved will admit out loud afterward. Cuffed, bleeding slightly from a cut above your eye where you caught the edge of a support beam going down. You say one sentence that nobody standing in that barn will forget for a long time. I just wanted one day that wasn't inside. Nobody answers you. There's nothing to say to that. You learn the 8th rule face down in the dirt of that barn floor, dust in your mouth, wrists already aching from the cuffs. Desperation and danger aren't actually the same thing, but by the time they finally catch up to you, they've become almost impossible for anyone, including you, to tell apart. Level 9, the Transnational Cartel Fugitive. You're 38, a mid-tier lieutenant for a cartel cell running a fentanyl pipeline through 3 states. indicted federally on trafficking and conspiracy charges alongside 11 co-defendants in a case that's been building against you, quietly, for nearly 2 years. You cross into Mexico the same night the indictments unseal, hours ahead of the first knock, using a network built for exactly this exact contingency. Safe houses staged in 3 different cities, cash couriers who move money without ever touching a bank, a legal apparatus on the other side of the border specifically designed to make extradition as slow, expensive, and legally exhausting as humanly possible. This is the Marshals Office of International, operations working at full scale. Coordination across roughly 140 countries isn't marketing language, it's the literal, day-to-day infrastructure this specific unit runs on. It takes 14 months, liaison officers permanently stationed in Mexico City, and sustained cooperation from Mexican federal authorities under a joint task force agreement before you're finally located, hiding in plain sight in a mid-sized city you chose specifically because nobody would think to look there, running a completely legitimate-looking auto shop as cover, your name changed, your accent softened, your entire visible life rebuilt from nothing. Your arrest, when it finally comes, happens on foreign soil, executed by Mexican federal authorities with U.S. Marshals present strictly as observers, under the terms of the extradition agreement. American deputies aren't legally permitted to make the arrests themselves, even after you're in custody. It takes another 8 full months of legal proceedings before you're finally on a plane back to the United States to face charges in a federal courthouse in Texas. 3 deputies sit with you on that transport flight, saying almost nothing the entire way. You watch the clouds out the window for most of the 4 hours, and somewhere over the border, unprompted, you say quietly, mostly to yourself, that you knew this day would come eventually. You just didn't know it would take this long. Level 10, the 15 most wanted. You're 44, wanted for a double homicide connected to a gang-related shooting outside a nightclub that left 2 men dead and 3 more wounded. Elevated to the U.S. Marshals 15 most wanted list, a designation that fewer than 250 people have ever received in the entire history of the program since it began in 1983, reserved exclusively for the small handful of fugitives considered the most dangerous in the entire country at any given time. Being placed on that list changes the fundamental shape of the manhunt for you overnight. It means a coordinated nationwide press release with your face on it. It means a public cash reward, substantial enough to change someone's life. It means tip lines lighting up with hundreds of leads a week, most of them false, mistaken, or simply someone settling a grudge, but a real handful genuine enough to chase down personally, one by one. It means every regional fugitive task force in the country has your photograph pinned to a wall in a briefing room somewhere. It means access to resources a routine county warrant will simply never get, because the list exists to communicate one specific, unambiguous message to every law enforcement agency in America. You are actively dangerous to the public, right now, tonight, wherever you happen to be hiding. The lead that finally ends it, after 4 months on the list, comes from an anonymous call into the national hotline. A gas station clerk 3 states away, who recognizes your face from a wanted poster taped up near the register. A poster he'd walked past 100 times without really looking at it, until the 101st. You've been living under an assumed identity that whole time, working odd construction jobs for cash, blending into a small town of maybe 6,000 people that has absolutely no idea who's been renting the apartment above the hardware store for the last 3 months. The takedown itself is fast once your location's confirmed. 18 hours of quiet surveillance to be certain, then a coordinated approach at dawn, deputies coming through 2 doors simultaneously, the entire operation over in under 4 minutes. You don't resist. Almost nobody who makes it onto that list and survives on it this long does resist, not at the very end. By then, whatever fight you had left burned out months ago. You're just tired. You learn the 10th and final rule sitting in the back of a squad car at dawn, watching the small town you tried so hard to disappear into shrink and finally vanish in the side mirror. Every single level of this ladder, from the smallest bench warrant all the way up to this one, ends the exact same way it began, with a knock on a door you spent your entire time on the run, quietly, desperately hoping you'd never actually hear. Somewhere tonight, in a city you've probably never even thought about, someone is deciding not to show up for a court date they've convinced themselves doesn't really matter. They're wrong. It always matters. Every single time. No exceptions. And somewhere in a district office not far from wherever they're sitting, right now, half relieved and half anxious, telling themselves it'll just go away. A case file with their name typed neatly across the top is already being printed. The system doesn't forget. It just waits its turn,